Right. Much better. Okay. Excellent. Okay. Right. Well, welcome back again. I'm Richard Light. I've my sins am the chair of Free UK Genealogy. So basically everything is my fault. I come from the museum world. Essentially, I've been involved with museum information systems for most of my career. But I got interested in Free UK Genealogy through an interest in the sort of data that was being made available and the possibilities it offered for doing detailed research. So I've already broken most of the guidelines on the website as to what you're actually allowed to do with the data in the course of experimenting with the possibilities. And that's obviously the sort of thing that's led to our current move towards an open data strategy. So that's me. I'll now pass across.
Thank you. I'm just to confuse things. I'm another Richard. My name is Richard Pomfret, and I'm the technical project manager across the 3 projects. So any kind of technical questions or anything relating to what's going to happen down the line or what we're working on at the moment, then why don't we?
Okay. Well, I think you know everyone else. So
I'm not Richard.
Okay, so if I'd like to kick off, are there observations or questions for any of us?
Thank you. Ian Thompson, volunteer with my time mostly spent on FreeBMD. Now that we're beginning to transcribe 1983 records, and I understand that we're not going beyond 1983, what do you anticipate volunteers should be doing when we've completed that set of
Okay.
Right. We are hoping with GRO permission to go beyond 1983. That's just the limit that we have permission to do at the moment. We're in a very interesting situation because the GRO issued the later indices in digital form. And it seems to us that it is better to use that purer data and reserve that purer data than print it out and transcribe it. So what we're hoping actually is that we will get permission to take that data from them and serve it. We've got literally billions of records already, but only a proportion of them have been double transcribed. And double transcription is one of the ways that we get the quality. So there is years of work to do on things for the second time to improve the quality of them. And then Eric was waving frantically behind, so I will mention that other projects are also available.
You mentioned hopefully,
Ted's asking FreeBMD. You mentioned hopefully you're going to achieve this. Have you any idea of a timescale?
I'm going to repeat the question just in case people didn't hear it, which was, do I have any idea of the timescale? We requested this data as a Freedom of Information request in December last year. I was perhaps not quite precise enough in the request for data. So shortly after the 20 days which you get to answer a Freedom of Information request ran out, they asked me for clarification, which I sent back to them. I have been chasing them ever since for an answer to this FOI inquiry, which is actually one very difficult for them to answer because it's very difficult for them to say anything other than, yes, of course, here's the data. At least that's my assumption. I queried with the Office of Information of the Office of the Information Commissioner back in May what we could do, and he suggested we ask them to conduct an internal review and to connect with their internal review team to find out what had gone wrong in answering this FOI inquiry. I found out they don't actually have an internal review team for FOI, but they promised that they would look anyway and find out what had gone wrong. Last month, I ran out of patience of waiting for them to come back to me to tell. Every time I contact them, they say it'll come very soon. So I've now escalated it as a formal complaint to the Office of the Information Commissioner, which is perhaps not the most fast answer to an FOI inquiry in the history of the universe. So I'm afraid I'm not able to give you a timescale because it depends on the outcomes of that.
Are there any plans to transcribe records from, say, Scotland or Northern Ireland? Which would be very helpful.
Eric, do you want to answer that one, or at least from you?
Yes, I can say a bit about it, because at Northern Ireland, we do actually have access to the parish records there, and we are making a start on it. They are actually in a form where they have been transcribed, and we just need to put them into a form that they can come into FreeReg. So that's underway. I think some of Fermanagh is already there.
Yeah, I'm aware of Scottish records being a FreeReg, but I was thinking of birth, marriages and deaths, which is a bit frustrating when you've got a family member from one of those areas and it only includes England and Wales.
Hi, I'm Mike Simpson. I work with Carol Barber on FreeSend. One of the questions I have is a lot of the counties seem to have limited amount of census years that are available. Is there a program to get more of the census years available for us to transcribe?
Yes, I'm trying to get permission to for us to transcribe, and also talking to people like there's two elements to it. One is the permission to transcribe, which is a bit fraught, complicated in that the nature of any permission is not well understood, and the other is actual physical access to the images, and I'm working on both fronts. Talking of bringing that back to the question about Scotland and Northern Ireland, Scotland's People, I understand, has recently changed ownerships or management, and I'm hoping that that might lead us to be able to work in a more reciprocal way. The Northern Ireland, as Eric said, with the Church of, I'm trying to think which church, is it Church of Ireland records?
I think we've only got Northern Ireland, we've got only the Northern Ireland counties at the moment.
But which church is it?
We'd like to do the whole of Ireland, yes.
Yeah, yes. No, I was thinking of which religious church. So is it the Catholic churches, non-conformists, or all of them?
Any of them, yeah, that we can get access to, yes.
Yeah. We'd like to work with the National Archives of Ireland, again, to see if we can transcribe from their website.
You may need to change your name.
When I first started doing family research, mine was for Belfast for my mum, and I've been over a few times, but I have actually purchased 7 film rolls of churches in and around Belfast from the Public Record Office. I haven't got around to transcribing them all yet, but I had to get permission from some of the churches, but the others I could just apply straight to Public Record Office for them. Yeah.
That would be great, yes.
Chris Pryor, FreeUKGen volunteer. How much of a risk are we in a legal clash with the paywall masters of Ancestry and Free My Past and such like? Are there areas where we potentially are going to be in court, for example?
I don't, well, no, we do not encourage people to use Ancestry or any other source of images where you have to sign a terms of conditions to enter it. The person who's going to get caught and face fines, etc., is the individual breaching the terms and conditions they signed up to.
I was more concerned about, are there areas of data which we are not going to be able to access because they're locked away?
From the perspective of the source image that has been created, the way the model worked from memory was that the commercial organisation would create their images and then make their transcriptions, but the National Archives would receive a clean set of those images. And after a certain period of time has elapsed, and that will vary from contract to contract, and I don't know that because it's confidential, they could then relicense with a separate set of terms and conditions to whomever wishes to approach them. Now, I would imagine that license would come at a cost, but there is the potential to gain access to that. So that would be a negotiation with whoever is left of the National Archives to undertake those negotiations. But because the teams have moved and disappeared, so there is the potential to get access to, just have to start working out whether in that sense, it's the National Archives material to do with as it wishes. And this is where I think exerting some pressure on the Open Government Initiative around use and reuse of data would be very interesting and timely, particularly as they have invested in their research department in looking at big and linked data. As we know, there have been approaches to use of free BMD material in particular to run checks on whether they can then license further material based on expected lifespans of an individual. So there is that sort of potential, but quite where that is, I don't know if that's a negotiation that could be undertaken. It must be coming towards the end, and the fact that they are licensing out monetized data is just down to cost.
Pat, do you want to say something about the 100-year rule?
Yeah, the 100-year rule doesn't exist. It's got no legal foundation whatsoever. What does exist is something called the Data Protection Act, which protects personal data, and it has various classes of personal data. So your name is non-sensitive data. The fact that you are John Smith doesn't really matter at all. But the fact that you as John Smith are a transcriber for FreeUKGen doesn't matter at all. What does matter is sensitive things like, are you disabled? What's your religion? What's your ethnicity? And this only really comes into play on the FreeReg project, because on FreeReg, people make declarations of their religion by marrying in church, by baptizing their children, sometimes by being buried in a churchyard. So it then becomes within the purview of sensitive data. The non-sensitive data isn't so bad, but it becomes sensitive data. It only applies to living people. Once you're dead, as far as data protection is concerned. You haven't got any rights left. So FreeCen is fine because everybody's dead. Free BMD is not so fine in that it is covering people who are living individuals. But there is an argument that this data is not protected by the Data Protection Act because of the nature of the data. For FreeReg and for FreeBMD, if it is covered by the Act, there is a really useful, it's not a loophole, you're allowed to hold data about living individuals, including sensitive data, for research purposes. Guess what we do? This will restrict what we can release as open data because people might use it for non-research purposes. But if people are, we're using it for research purposes, we can open it. The one thing that we have to be careful about is that if somebody can prove that they are distressed by the publication of their data, we should consider taking it down until they're dead. We have decided as the trustees and myself that we are not going to make people prove that they are distressed. If they say they are distressed by seeing their christening record, that's fine. What we do want to be sure, though, is that they are who they say they are, and not just randomly pretending to be somebody else just to annoy researchers. So there is no 100-year rule. However, a lot of the organisations, this is for FreeReg, that have given us access to their data and allowed us to transcribe, have put in place 100-year rules, 25-year rules, 80-year rules, basically pick a number out of the air rule. And this is a lot of work for our county coordinators who have to watch at the end of each year who's now coming into public access and releasing that data out to public search. And one of the developments we're doing on FreeReg is to automate that so that the coordinators no longer have to, on New Year's Day, release the data from 100 years back, but it will know that it's ticked over the 100 years or whatever they've put on as a restriction and can automatically release it. Sorry, that was a very long answer. It's a very involved subject.
Just following on from that, presumably in some parish records where you have that year, if it's a small parish, the year will date from the final entry into that parish data. And therefore, I mean, I've come across them where the parish record might cover 30 years because it's a small parish and not much happened in it. So if it's sort of 100 years from that, you might actually have more than 100 years in purdah, as it were, for the very first entries in it.
Correct me if I'm wrong, Eric, but I think we've only been told that you can't relay at least a specific record for a period rather than the entire register for a period.
We can only do the entire register at the moment. Yeah, we've got to do some work on it, basically.
Yeah.
Thank you. Hello, Jo Fitzhenry and Rowan Tanner and Susan Humbleby from the Guild of One Name Studies. So thanks for letting us come along to your meet. It's been really enjoyable so far. So as an international genealogical society that covers lots of different aspects of births, marriages, deaths, places, where our members are sort of like honing down onto you know, aspects that involve their family names. How can we sort of like help you in the FreeGen world, and what sort of interactions can you see us sort of like having in future?
Well, as I mentioned in my introduction, I did a sort of mini one-name study myself, that I plundered all of our resources for all the lights available, and then sort of put them out into a local database just to see what connections I could make with the data and what the sort of possibilities were. Now, out of that, obviously, I generated a local database file, and that's presumably exactly the sort of thing that your members will be doing with their own projects. And as such, the question really is, how can we share the results of people's research in a way which is conformant with what they want to do. I am aware that it's not universally the case that everybody wants everything to be open, including their own work. And I've seen websites where someone has clearly gone to enormous trouble to present something that looked like a table of data, but was actually lots of data pushed across the web page by CSS style instructions, so you couldn't actually reverse engineer the logic of that data. So clearly that was done with a determination to put it before the public, but not in a way that someone else could actually make use of. So I think there are issues around there that maybe not everyone will agree to this sort of approach. But in principle, if we can actually have a framework whereby your members can publish data in a form that's compatible with other resources, then we can potentially start to join up the results of individual projects across. So, if one bit of your family hierarchy matches with one bit of my family hierarchy, we can actually join the two by that one person, then suddenly we've got a much bigger hierarchy. And so the whole thing could actually develop in that way. So in principle, I mean, that's the sort of thing I personally would really like to be able to do. And one thing I'm working on myself is a project called Linked Pasts, which is an outgrowth of a project called Pelagios, which is a group of researchers of the early modern Mediterranean period. And they've done a lot of work on developing linked data resources for places and people. And what that group wants to do is to broaden out this collaborative approach to the whole of history. So a modest ambition. And as such, what we're looking at are developing guidelines for the sort of information you should be recording about people and places in order to better able to share that information with others. So in order to know whether you're talking about the same individual, you need to have your facts about that person and the other person's facts. You need to check that those facts match, obviously to the best of your guessing, because there are uncertainties in all of this, uncertainties about dates, about places, and so on. So it's a certain sort of judgment there. But essentially, we're hoping to move our own resources so that they're not just open data, but what are called linked data. And in the process, we'll give unique identities to every record, every person that's mentioned in our data. And so there'll be a peg, as it were, onto which you can hang your own conclusions where you think it's the same individual from your own data. And I'm hoping that sort of technique can be used so we can share across projects without having to create the one massive database at the center, but to do it in a series of linked but separate databases.
Sort of leads almost on to my next question, really. Is it possible, and are there any facilities envisaged for people to be able to link data that is found to be wrong, but is what was actually recorded, and for that to be sort of made available to public so that they can do it? I'll give you the reason. Been tracing my own family. The family name is Prior, spelled Prior, and I lost the family in a move in census because the transcriber had, whoever recorded the census, spelled the name differently, the surname. So if you do a search, you don't find it. But I was able to trace records back and confirm based on family members and dates and places of birth and such like. It was the same family, but they're recorded on the census results as different names. Obviously, they really ought to be connected back together again, but I don't know of any mechanism whereby that could be sort of made available so that anybody else who's doing a similar sort of search can do that. And I'm sure that other people who are using data will find similar sorts of things. Pierce, names spelt with an S or a C and such like that. And lots of names where they might be spelled differently by different people at different times. But obviously, people will know that they refer to the same individuals. And we're sort of, it make it very difficult to connect that information back together again. I know technically it'd probably be a nightmare to do that, but what's the thoughts of being able to do that?
Well, that does follow on from on the sort of this approach of using a linked data identifier. Basically, if you give a unique identifier to each person in your data, not one that's related to their name or any of the data you've got about them, it's just in principle just a number, but that is unique and therefore never needs to change as your knowledge about that person develops, then you can start to make assertions that in your view this person called Pryor is actually the same individual as or the father of this other person called Pryor spelled differently, who also has their own hook. So these unique linked data identifiers become the hooks on which you can hang the assertions you want to make about the individuals or indeed about the data itself, whether it's wrong. So in Pelagios project, you will have a number of what are called attestations, which is a word I learned relatively recently. In other words, pieces of evidence from history about an individual or about a place having existed with a certain name. And opinions will vary as to the correctness of these or the individual to whom they might have applied. And that's obviously what scholars do. They look at things and they disagree. So you need to have a framework which actually allows you to record different conclusions. There isn't one right answer. And certainly the data that we're working with is very far from perfect in all sorts of ways, both in terms, as you say, of orthography, the actual spelling of names, but also the precision of the dates that we've got to work with. So the BMD dates are quarterly summaries and after the event, so they're not that precise. The places we're working with are registration districts, so they're not that precise either. So if you're trying to actually draw conclusions from these various bits of fuzzy data, then obviously there's lots of scope for interpretation and disagreement.
Okay, yes. On FreeReg in version 1.7, we're only on 1.5 at the moment. We have plans for this. A researcher will be able to register. We need them to register because we need their email address and contact, and we need to know their bona fide. And then they will be able to create an associated record. They can't change the original, but they can put one next to it and say, this is my interpretation of it. To give you an example, I know from my family in about 1765, because we're from Somerset, and my surname being Dickens, but they were illiterate mariners. And in the register, there is a Diggins, D-I-G-G-I-N-S, for the simple reason they had no idea what it was. And if you say with a Somerset accent, he said, my name be Diggins. And that's what's in the register. So what I will do when this facility comes in, I will put an associated record to say that this is, or I think it is, a Dickens. And that will be searchable. So it's there, it's in the planning, but I'm afraid as things go at the moment, you've got to wait another 2 to 3 years, I think.
Going back to the gentleman's question about surname soundings different and spellings different. I mean, a lot of databases uses Soundex and other type systems where different spellings of Pryor would come up no matter how they were spelled. It's not an answer.
That's available.
Yes.
Available FreeUKGen. Not on the census though. The census data I found it wrong.
Hello, sorry. Cheryl Honeysett, I'm a FreeReg transcriber. I'm just hearing all this about people being able to add things and link things. And I've had a look at Wikitree and also on Family Search, and they seem to have built inaccuracies upon inaccuracies and spend a huge amount of time trying to
get back to what is actually provable. So I see some risks in what's being suggested here, that we get away from our reputation for having highly accurate demonstrational transcriptions and venture into those areas which could take up an awful lot of time to manage. So there's a cost benefit needs to go on there as to what that will add and how that might damage the reputation.
I'll just add to that from a historian's perspective. The point I started with was the confidence that the data is correct. Transcribe what you see. The interpretation is down to the person then using it. So I think there are two separate things. One is making sure that the data is as accurate as possible. And then there's this wider thing that challenges all of these aggregation genealogical sites. Be they commercial, Ancestry, Find My Passport, we know there are transcription areas that people have then built upon. And then the desire to clean them up or correct them. This goes beyond the transcriptions. I've had many people over the years saying, I want to correct the original record, because when that ancestor put it down, that we've now had more information come to light, which is very, very difficult to do, as we know, because that is the record as it was. The thing I'll throw out there in the cleansing process, to put it like that, things such as blockchain, which is the system behind Bitcoin. So it's about nodal authentication. So if you have a community that are all working on a particular problem and they're all then authenticating it, each transaction is then stamped and verified, and therefore it's meant to be self-correcting. It's been seen as potentially disruptive. Whether or not that then feeds into the genealogical work, I don't know, but it is something to watch out for. As you say, trying to unpick people's decisions and connections, we know out of the several billion records that Ancestry puts up, there's all sorts of junk. And that's where we are. It may well be that this is an approach to maybe start from scratch and look at the core records and begin that process. So that's just more of a historian's insight. I don't know if you want to.
Just that. I was just going to.
Yeah.
Okay. I was just going to say that two things. One is on that particular thing with WikiTree or One Tree World, where it's called, all the various ones in France. They have quite a lot of them as well. The key difference with what we're doing is we have got the source records, and we're not changing the source records. I mean, anyone who's been in FreeBMD for a long time will have heard us just say, transcribe what you see, and that's it. And the reason for that is that we have that original record. So any of these functions and things that are being suggested would be on top of it, and they would be functions that someone would do or someone would provide as a service, whether we did or whether it was some other company doing it. By opening the data, we allow that to happen. But our data would still remain the data that it is, and that would have to be the same. So we keep that consistency of the data. It's very important. I think on all of these things as well, going to open data, everything we've mentioned so far can only happen if we are open data. All of these things, they require us to be open data, and hopefully the things that are going on are, give people an understanding as to why we've been pushing for the open data side of things, because it just makes all of this stuff possible.
I'd just like to make sure that there's nobody watching via YouTube who's got a burning question and hasn't sent one or an observation, because we would love to take it.
There's nothing coming in. We've got just lost 2 watchers. And no comments or questions, and nothing on social media either. So I think he must have asked and has answered all of the burning questions from the members of the public.
In the early days, some of the images that I used for transcription were very hard to read. And some years ago, we began doing retranscription of the pages we had ourselves transcribed once new images became available. How do you handle, let me start again. I know that when the 2 transcribed records are identical, we can see in the database that the text is in bold. How do you handle when they're different, because the new image has allowed us to read the data more accurately? do you end up with 2 records, one of which is wrong? Yeah, the answer at the moment is yes, you do. You end up with 2 records, so you will have both records there. The final answer is that there's a quality check process going through, which will then work those out and identify those ones, and then someone will look at them and make a decision about what they're going to be, which is a process I think under Barry, I think, has under the quality side of things. So it's it's not necessarily fully being done at the moment, but you will end up with 2 records. And again, you probably want to keep the 2 records until we've been sure that one of them is wrong, again, on the basis of type what you see, that's what you see. One thing just to say, when you're saying that you transcribe the second one yourselves, our second transcription would always be done by someone else in a different syndicate, because otherwise you're potentially seeing the same mistake if your eyes are seeing it. So, yeah, different scans. Yeah, no, different scans. That's right. Yeah.
We have had a comment from just somebody from on the YouTube video who'd like to say something. Yeah. So this is from. Oh. This is from. Yeah, it is, isn't it? Okay. Anne from Leaves Family History Research Services says that she thinks that the postum system on FreeUKGen is a good way for people to add things without it impacting on the purity of the records that we've transcribed.
I think it's not searchable, though, is it?
It is searchable.
Is it searchable? Okay,
Just one final thing. My train's not till 5:30, so if any free reg people want to have a chat to me after this meeting, just come and collect around here. But I don't know what time we're being thrown out of here. Does anyone know?
We've got the room for the day, but I think if you're going to start ordering dinner and things, they're going to get a little bit fancy.
Right. Anyway, so if pre-reg people want to come and see me afterwards, we can have a chat about things.
Yeah. I think there should be definitely some time for that, but the meeting is finishing now, unless anybody has any burning questions.
Well, one thing that we're sort of suggesting we would actually throw out to you, so I will, is just to ask you if there's anything around about what we do by way of providing support for your transcription work that you would like to see improved or changed, or any sort of additional facilities that might be offered. I mean, looking at what comes up on the discussion list, there's lots of interesting discussions about particular families, where someone clearly has quite detailed knowledge of that particular family. And recently there's been a discussion about unusual names, as a result of which we now have a shared spreadsheet of all the unusual forenames that people have encountered. And so I just wonder whether there's anything along those sorts of lines that you'd like to sort of flag up as something that would actually help you in your work.
An approved gazetteer.
Well, I've tackled a few people during the earlier break. My problem really is Mac, Apple Mac computers, and the problem of Mac winning BMD. Basically, I can't cope with them. I have to turn them away. And Macs are now becoming so popular and in use, whereas when we started, very few people had a Mac PC. Everybody was on Windows. But we really do need to put some effort into bringing Mac users into our transcription.
Well, I can just, sorry, I'll just jump in there. I consider that's something we are looking to do at the moment. I won't bother with so we're recruiting at the moment to bring in some tech volunteers who are specialising in Mac to bring the Mac software up to the spec of what we have on those at the moment.
Does LibreOffice work on Mac?
I LibreOffice, I'm aware of that.
Yeah.
I mean, we use.
All I guess is a spreadsheet. Okay.
That's a different approach.
All right. Because I use Linux, I don't use Microsoft.
Okay.
Test it. It does work on Mac.
Yeah. I'm obviously speaking
from FreeBMD here, but the problem is twofold. One is the transcription program WinBMD, which most people use, right? And the other is the BMD Verify, which I hope most people use. Now, there is a Mac BMD, but it's not very good, really, and I wouldn't recommend it to any of my users. And secondly, there's no Mac Verify program, which really there must be. And it's a very simple program. I mean, it's only about 256K. I mean, it's not a big thing, but there is a problem there.
Yes, and I'm glad you mentioned it. We are aware of it, and we are looking to address for both of those software at the moment. So it's in the works. Sure.
There is one last question. Yeah. Apologies, I know this is going to go horribly noisily wrong. Right. Is that hope that's okay. Another question from Anne from Leaves Family History Research asking, are there plans to transcribe the Adopted Children's Register? I did have a conversation with the GRO about 18 months ago, and then they were feeling that probably we weren't going to be able to do that due to the extreme sensitivity of the data. It's the same with the gender reassignment register. But of course, in due course, people will pass away and that data will be available.
Okay, so I think we've exhausted all our questions and thoughts. So just remains to thank you all very much for having taken the trouble to come out here on a Saturday. We hope you found it enjoyable and useful. And we hope to see you all next year. So we're hoping to have another autumn meeting and maybe make this a regular thing. So thank you all very much.